The afternoon was cold, and the sky began to take on shades of orange and pink. Tom, incredulous, stood frozen for a few minutes. Moments earlier, sitting on the step of an old building in the city center, Tom watched people hurrying by, bags in hand, their faces buried in their phone screens. He felt the chill more than any of the pedestrians around. With a worn-out coat barely covering his shoulders and shoes with holes, the cold hit him straight to the bone, and he wondered how he would get through another freezing night. Days were long and lonely for Tom. Since his life had changed, he adapted to a new rhythm, surviving on what little he could gather from donations or occasional temporary work that would come up now and then. It had been years since he had a home to call his own, and a home was a distant, nearly lost memory. His heart still tightened when he thought of the night. Everything disappeared in fire and smoke. But Tom had learned to swallow the pain and move forward, because it was the only option left. He never expected that day to be any different. To him, it was just another ordinary day. Asking for help, facing disapproving or indifferent looks, and being grateful for any coins tossed his way. But suddenly, something broke the pattern. A tall man, in a well-tailored suit, approached slowly. He stopped in front of Tom and stared at him with an intensity that made the homeless man look up. Tom stared at the stranger for a moment, feeling a slight discomfort at how he was being looked at. It was rare for anyone to look at him for more than a second. It was even rarer for someone to stop altogether. The man looked at him as if searching for something, as if trying to see through his tired expression and unkempt, graying beard. A heavy silence hung between them until the man finally spoke.
"Tom?"
he said, his voice deep but soft, filled with a familiarity that surprised Tom. Tom stared at him, trying to remember who he was. The name sounded strange coming from a stranger, even more so from someone who didn't seem to belong to his world. He squinted, suspicious, but found no recollection of that elegant face.
"Do we know each other?"
"Yes, I know who you are."
The man replied enigmatically. He hesitated for a moment, as if pondering how much to reveal. Then he added with a firm voice,
"My name is William, and I came here for you, Tom."
The words lingered like a riddle in the air. Tom blinked a few times, still not fully understanding. He searched for a memory, a connection that could justify this man's presence. Who was he? Why did he seem to know so much about him? William crouched down to be at Tom's level and observed the man before him with rare attention. His eyes seemed to probe, as if trying to see the person Tom had been before the situation.
"Look, I don't know what you want from me,"
Tom said, finally breaking the ice.
"but if you're here to donate something, I'll take it. Otherwise, you can move along."
William gave a slight smile at that.
"Actually, I'm here to make you an offer. An unusual offer, perhaps,"
he said, with a tone that mixed friendliness and mystery. He continued,
"It's an offer that could change your life, but you need to trust me."
Tom felt his heart race. He had heard promises from strangers before, few of which brought anything but disappointment. However, something about the man's demeanor conveyed a truth that he couldn't ignore. Even so, he was naturally skeptical. Life on the streets had taught him to distrust everything and everyone.
"I don't know who you are,"
Tom said cautiously,
"nor why you would care to change the life of someone like me. But tell me what you have in mind."
William observed Tom's wary expression and, after a long sigh, spoke clearly.
"I'm going to give you a significant amount of money, enough for you to live comfortably for a month. But there's a condition."
Tom looked at him with suspicion. He had heard of people who enjoyed playing with others' hopes, promising help only to leave them worse off than before. He didn't want to fall into such a trap, but something made him believe that this man, William, was not one of those.
"And what would that condition be?"
Tom asked, remaining cautious, although his eyes already reflected a spark of curiosity.
"The condition is that you use this money over the course of a month, exactly 30 days. And at the end of that period, I want us to meet to discuss what you did with it."
William paused, choosing his words carefully.
"But after the deadline, you will no longer be able to count on that amount."
Tom frowned, trying to understand the purpose of such an unusual proposal. It was a generous amount, but what did William expect from him? And why did he care to know what Tom would do with the money? Questions bubbled in his mind, but he kept his voice steady.
Why do you want me to do this? What do you get out of this, really?
William took a deep breath, as if the weight of the question was greater than he was willing to answer. With a serious look, however, he continued.
Let's say, I have my reasons, personal reasons.
Those words, vague but loaded with emotion, intrigued Tom even more. He observed the man before him, trying to decipher the hidden intentions in that mysterious speech. It was clear that William did not intend to reveal all the details. But even so, Tom felt that there was sincerity there, a sincerity that he had not found in anyone for a long time.
So, do you want to give me this chance?
Tom said, finally absorbing the words of the man in front of him.
And if I accept, what do you expect me to do with this money?
There is no right answer to this, Tom. I want you to do what you believe is right. I am not here to judge your choices, only to see what you are capable of doing with this opportunity.
For a moment, Tom thought about all the pent-up desires he carried in his chest. He thought about how he could use the money to secure decent meals, new clothes, maybe even a place to sleep without the constant fear of being kicked out or attacked. But at the same time, the concept of only having a month to enjoy this benefit was an intriguing and slightly frightening idea. Tom wondered what would happen after that, and, most importantly, what William really expected of him. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision, and looked up to meet William's serious, patient gaze.
What if I decide this isn't for me?
Tom asked more to test the man than to actually refuse. William smiled, a smile of understanding.
You are free to decide whatever you want, but I believe that an opportunity like this does not come around twice. I'm not here by chance. There is a reason for all this.
Those last words seemed to echo inside Tom, as if something dormant inside him had been awakened. He did not know exactly what this man saw in him, but perhaps it was time to find out. Perhaps he still had something to offer the world, something beyond the misery he lived every day. With a slight nod, he finally agreed.
Okay, William. I accept your offer. 30 days. Let's see what I can do with it.
William nodded, looking satisfied with the answer. He took an envelope from his coat pocket and handed it to Tom.
Here it is. Feel free to do whatever you want.
Tom took the envelope, its weight sparking something inside him. It was a mixture of hope and fear, a feeling he hadn't experienced in a long time. He watched William for one last moment, trying to engrave that face in his memory, but William was already walking away, with the same enigmatic calm with which he had arrived. Before disappearing into the crowd, William gave him one last look and a brief wave, leaving Tom with more questions than answers. With the envelope in his hands, Tom opened it and was amazed to see the amount of money inside. It was more than he would have imagined, enough to change his reality, even if only temporarily. He took a deep breath, a mixture of disbelief and excitement taking over him. That night, he lay down under the starry sky, with the envelope safely in his pocket and his mind racing, already planning what he would do from the next day on. He knew that an unknown path full of possibilities lay ahead of him, and, for the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to believe that things might change. The next morning, Tom woke up earlier than usual. The city was still awake at the first steps of dawn, but he could already feel his heart racing, as if he were in the middle of a crowd. The previous night had almost been a daydream, a feeling that everything that had happened had been nothing more than a dream. However, when he touched his pocket and felt the volume of the envelope that William had given him, he remembered that it was real. The envelope was there, full of real bills, and he could use them as he saw fit, at least for the next month. He got up slowly, still trying to process what he would do with all that money. For months he had lived off scraps, off sporadic donations, struggling to survive with the bare minimum. Now, he had the power to choose what to eat, what to wear, even where to sleep. Tom still didn't understand William's intentions, but he knew that this was a unique opportunity, something he hadn't expected and didn't know if he deserved. Thinking about how he would use the money, he walked to a modest cafe on the corner. It was one of the places he used to observe from a distance, always curious about the aroma that spread through the air when the doors opened. Today, he could finally go in and buy whatever he wanted. The thought made his heart beat faster, as if he were about to break an invisible rule. When he entered, the eyes of the other customers fell on him, and Tom immediately felt the weight of their judgment. His clothes were still the same, worn and marked by time, and he knew that his appearance didn't fit in there. However, now he had something that changed everything: money. He kept his gaze lowered, walking to the counter. The attendant, who seemed suspicious, watched him cautiously.
"I'll have a coffee and a roll with butter, please,"
he asked, his voice low and hesitant. The waitress looked him up and down, as if assessing whether he could afford it. Tom caught her expression, and for a moment he was tempted to give up, to walk away and return to his usual spot on the sidewalk. But then he remembered that, for a brief time, he had a right to be here too. He left a note on the counter before she could say anything and walked to one of the tables in the back. Sitting there, he savored the first sip of hot coffee and the first piece of bread he'd eaten in days. It was a different feeling, something he couldn't quite define. It was more than the taste. It was the idea that, even if it was temporary, he had a choice. As he ate, his mind began to wander. He wondered what he could do with the rest of his money. Dress up better, buy a blanket to face the cold nights outside, maybe rent a simple room for a few weeks, just to feel, for a brief period, what it was like to have a roof over his head again. He knew these were basic needs, but deep down, there was something that bothered him. He felt that using the money only for his own benefit was an incomplete, almost empty choice. As he left the cafe, he stopped at a second-hand clothing store, looking at what he could buy to replace his old coat. He decided to go in and picked up a few simple pieces, just enough to keep him warm and presentable. As he went to the cashier and paid, he felt the same judgment in the eyes of the saleswoman, but he stood his ground. Putting on his new clothes, he began to feel more comfortable with the idea of walking the streets with a little more dignity. But still, the envelope was full. He could use it for more than just satisfying his needs. With that thought in mind, he decided to walk to a familiar spot where other homeless people used to gather. Upon arriving, he saw familiar faces, people he saw almost daily. They were worn faces, like his own, marked by the weight of life on the streets. He approached, and they looked at him in surprise. It was rare for someone like him to appear there with new clothes and an expression that denoted something different, like a kind of hope mixed with hesitation.
"Tom, you look different,"
commented one of the men, who had known him for years. Tom hesitated for a moment, but felt it was time to share some of his new luck. He took a note from his pocket and handed it to the man, who looked at him with wide eyes.
"For you. Buy a decent meal,"
Tom said, trying to keep his voice steady. The man accepted the money, still surprised, and thanked him. But soon others in the group approached, watching the scene expectantly. Tom felt torn. He knew he couldn't help everyone. Not for long, but he wanted to use this opportunity in a meaningful way. He knew the money wouldn't solve everything, but perhaps it could plant a seed of hope, a bit of the dignity he too was seeking. As he handed out a few bills to those he knew, a sense of accomplishment began to grow in his chest. It was as if, by sharing a bit of his temporary good fortune, he was regaining a part of himself he thought he had lost forever. The first few days after William's proposal passed quickly, and Tom was already getting used to the freedom that money provided. He couldn't deny it. There was a strange sense of security in knowing that, at least for a while, he wouldn't have to fight for every meal or worry about the cold of winter nights. The new clothes and hot meals were simple pleasures, but Tom knew that wasn't all. There was something inside him that's still restless, something that made him feel like he could and should do more. After helping some of his fellow homeless people with meals and money, Tom realized that he could multiply the reach of his help. He began to observe the world around him with a more attentive eye, looking for needs that might have gone unnoticed before. That was how, One morning, while having coffee in the same place he had been on the first day, he saw a group of people around a makeshift tent that was distributing food to the homeless. He watched for a while, intrigued by the idea of seeing charity being practiced there, in the middle of the street. The team was small, made up of just 3 young people and an older woman, but they seemed determined and dedicated to what they were doing. They spoke to the homeless in a respectful manner, calling each one by name, handing out hot soup and fresh bread. This touched Tom deeply, because he realized that it wasn't just food that these people were offering. It was dignity, a reminder that, even without anything, each individual there had value. Tom felt a growing desire to be a part of it, to join them and make their help even more meaningful. And with the envelope still full in his pocket, he knew he could contribute to expanding this initiative. Moved by this impulse, he approached the woman who seemed to be coordinating the distribution and asked permission to speak with her.
Excuse me, my name is Tom, and I would like to know more about the work you do here.
The woman looked at him with a kind smile, clearly happy to see someone interested in the cause. She introduced herself as Margaret and explained that the stall was part of a small charity project she had started with her children and some friends.
It's what we can do with the resources we have. Some people donate the ingredients, and we prepare the meals at home and bring them here. It's not much, but it helps alleviate some people's hunger.
Tom listened attentively, feeling a deep admiration for the simplicity and generosity of that gesture. He felt that he could learn from those people and at the same time contribute in some way. The idea of offering part of the money to strengthen the initiative crossed his mind, but he knew that doing something without thinking it through could seem strange or invasive. So he decided to offer his help in a way that showed his genuine interest.
Can I help in any way? I know what it's like to live on the streets, and I know how a hot meal can make a difference. I'd like to contribute.
Margaret looked at him with a mixture of surprise and curiosity. She seemed to think about it for a moment, but her welcoming smile quickly dispelled any doubts.
Of course, Tom. The more hands, the better. We always need help, whether it's preparing the food or distributing it.
So Tom began working alongside Margaret and her team, serving meals and hearing the stories of each person who came to the tent. He realized that, although he was there as someone who offered help, he was also a receiver. The experience of being able to look into the eyes of those he served and hear their stories gave him a new perspective. He began to understand how much he had changed since receiving William's envelope, and each person he met seemed to rekindle a spark of purpose that he thought he had lost. Working alongside Margaret and the small group of volunteers, Tom felt he was reconnecting with the value of human dignity and compassion. He discovered that despite their extremely vulnerable lives, the people on the streets had stories full of courage, loss, and unfulfilled dreams. They all seemed to share a kind of silent code of survival and resilience, and Tom realized that in some way he was helping to shed some light on the path of those who, like him, felt lost. As the days went by, he noticed that Margaret's resources were limited. They often had to ration meals so that everyone got something. Seeing this, Tom realized that he could do more than just serve food. He had the power to make sure no one had to leave hungry. So one morning, he arrived at the tent early and found Margaret organizing the food.
Margaret, I know you guys do an amazing job here, and I wanted to help keep this project going. I know you need more supplies, and I can provide that for a while.
Margaret looked at him, surprised.
Tom, that's very generous, but how?
She hesitated, not understanding how someone who seemed to live in the same conditions as those in line could offer such help. Tom smiled, understanding her doubt.
Let's just say someone gave me an unexpected chance.
He explained, avoiding details so as not to raise more questions.
I just want this money to be used for something good. So if I can contribute so that no one has to leave empty-handed, I would be happy.
Seeing his sincerity, Margaret accepted the offer with gratitude. In the days that followed, Tom used part of the money to buy fresh food, blankets, and even some hygiene products to distribute to those in need. As the project grew, he realized that he was giving back something that had been taken from him long ago, the ability to make a difference, to feel useful and to give back to the support he himself had once received. Tom's transformation did not go unnoticed. People around him began to notice the change in his face, the brightness that seemed to be returning to his eyes. Even his posture had changed. Where before there was a man bent over by the weight of life, now there was someone standing upright, with a firm gaze and full of purpose. On one of the distribution days, a young man named Eddie, whom Tom had met during his nights on the streets, approached the stall. Eddie was just over 20 years old and had the lost look of someone who had not yet found his place in the world. He looked at Tom with a mixture of surprise and admiration.
Tom, I almost didn't recognize you. You look different, stronger. What happened?
Tom put a hand on the boy's shoulder, a gesture that conveyed the same security he had felt by William's side.
It turned out that someone believed in me.
He replied with a sincerity that surprised even himself.
And I think I can do the same for you, Eddie.
Eddie was silent for a moment, absorbing those words, and then he looked down as if afraid to believe. He had been through so many disappointments that it was hard for him to trust something so positive. But Tom saw in Eddie a reflection of his own doubts when he met William.
If I got a chance, you can too. But you have to believe that there is still something to do. We all have a path to follow, even when all seems lost.
And so, little by little, Tom began to build a small circle of support. It was not a formal organization or a structured group, but a gathering of people who were willing to help and inspire each other. He wasn't a leader by title, but his example motivated those around him, and Margaret could see that. She could see that since Tom had started contributing and actively participating in the food distribution, the group of volunteers had grown and the impact on the lives of those in need had increased.
Tom, you've brought something special to our work. People look at you and feel like they can make a difference too. That's something no amount of money can buy.
Her words resonated with Tom, reminding him of how he had felt when William had approached him as an agent of change in his life. In some ways, he was replicating the same generosity that William had shown when he had entrusted the envelope to him. And even as time passed and the end of the month approached, Tom knew that this was a journey he wanted to continue, even after the money ran out. As the project developed, Tom began to expand his support. In addition to food and blankets, he invested in finding a safe place for people to sleep during the coldest nights. He found an abandoned building nearby and, with the help of Margaret and some local contacts, was able to rent the space temporarily. The idea was simple but essential: to provide a place of shelter during the harshest winter nights, preventing people from having to face the extreme temperatures without any protection. However, for Tom, this transformation was not just a matter of resources. It was a matter of rediscovery. He realized that despite his situation and the hardships he had faced, he still had something to offer, something that was bigger than himself. The weeks passed quickly, and the food distribution tent, which had previously been a modest effort by Margaret and her children, had now become a reference point for many homeless people. Tom was there almost every day, organizing donations, caring for those who came seeking help, and offering words of comfort to those who needed more than just food and shelter. The energy and strength he had rediscovered seemed to overflow, and the community began to see him as a figure of support. But in the midst of this routine, something began to bother him. On several occasions, he would notice William's presence in the distance, always discreetly observing. Tom tried to ignore it, but it was hard not to notice the watchful gaze that followed him from a distant corner or a nearby sidewalk. William never came close enough to talk, but his presence was unmistakable, like a silent shadow that never left him. At first, Tom thought it was all just a coincidence. Maybe William was just checking on how he used the money, making sure the amount offered wasn't being wasted. But as the days went by, he began to question this constant observation. It wasn't just curiosity. There seemed to be something deeper in William's eyes, something Tom couldn't quite put his finger on. On one such occasion, Tom decided it was time to confront the mysterious benefactor. He waited until the day was almost over and most of the people had left the tent. When he looked over, there was William, standing in the distance, leaning against a post, his face partially hidden by the shadow of the evening. Tom took a deep breath and, gathering courage, walked towards him.
William, can I talk to you?
Tom called. Stopping a few steps away, William looked up, a slight smile forming on his lips, but with a reserved air, as if he was waiting for this approach.
Of course, Tom.
He replied, his voice calm and controlled. Tom hesitated for a moment, trying to find the right words. He didn't want to seem ungrateful, but he felt he had the right to understand what was happening.
I noticed that you've been watching me for the past few days, and I just wanted to understand, what exactly do you expect from me? Is there something I should know?
William held Tom's gaze, but didn't answer right away. He seemed to be considering it, as if Tom's question had prompted him to reflect on something deeper.
Tom, I told you I have my reasons. I wanted to see what you would do with the opportunity I gave you. And I have to say, so far, I'm impressed.
Impressed? I just did what I believed was right. What anyone in my position would do.
William shook his head, as if to gently disagree.
No, Tom. Most people in your situation would have used the money for themselves. They would have made different choices, thinking only of their own comfort. But you chose to share what you have, even when you know you'll only have it for a short time. That says a lot about who you really are.
Those words struck a chord with Tom in an unexpected way. It had been so long since he had heard someone acknowledge his qualities that he had almost forgotten what it was like to be seen that way. Still, the mystery surrounding William remained, and Tom was not about to let the conversation end there.
You still haven't answered my question. Why do you care so much? Why did you decide to help someone you've never met?
William smiled, but his gaze held a weight that hadn't been there before. He placed a hand on Tom's shoulder, a gesture that seemed simultaneously encouraging and protective.
I know more about you than you realize, Tom. And I believe that everyone deserves a second chance. You were once someone who made a difference in many people's lives, even if you don't remember it or it seems distant now. Maybe I'm just paying you back in some way.
Those words threw Tom into a confusion of thoughts. He tried to recall moments in his life, searching for something that could justify William's statement, but nothing seemed to fit. He couldn't imagine what he could have done that would justify such generosity from someone so far removed from his reality.
Repaying you? I don't know what I did to deserve this. My life has been, well, it's hard to remember what's left behind.
William nodded, seeming to understand. He gave Tom's shoulder a gentle squeeze before walking away.
Maybe you'll remember when the time is right. But for now, just move on. I'll be nearby watching.
And before Tom could press for more answers, William walked away, leaving him with more questions and answers once again. William's presence continued to make itself felt over the next few days. But there was something different about Tom now. Rather than just feeling observed, he started to view William as a silent guide, someone who inexplicably believed in him in a way no one else had in a long time. It was as if with every decision he made, with every small act of generosity, he was somehow proving something to William, and perhaps to himself. The next day, Tom arrived early at the food pantry with a different idea. During his walk the night before, a larger vision of what he could do had taken shape in his mind, as if all the pieces had begun to fall into place. He didn't want to just give away a plate of food or a temporary blanket. He wanted to do something that could help those like him who lived on the edge of the city get back on their feet and rebuild their lives. When Margaret arrived at work with her children, Tom called her over to talk. He hesitated a little before starting, but the determination in his eyes was clear.
Margaret, I think we can do more than just give away food. What do you think about creating a place where these people can learn a trade, perhaps gain skills that will help them get out of the situation?
Margaret listened intently, her face lighting up at the idea. She herself had always dreamed of expanding the help she offered, but had never had the resources to do so. Tom's idea brought with it a hope she hadn't felt in a long time.
That would be great, Tom. But how would we do it? A project like this needs money, more than we have available.
Tom nodded, understanding the reality she was pointing out.
I still have some of the money I received. I know it's not permanent, but we can use it to start something small. And if we show results, Maybe we can attract support from others who see the value of what we're doing.
He went on to describe his idea for a drop-in center that would offer workshops and short courses for the homeless. He envisioned a space where they could learn skills such as basic repairs, cooking, gardening, and other skills that would facilitate access to temporary work and perhaps even reintegration into the workforce. Margaret and the other volunteers were delighted with the proposal. They spent the rest of the day discussing how they could put this plan into practice, making lists of what they would need to get started, and thinking about contacts who could help raise the necessary materials. Tom felt that he was finally giving the money he had been entrusted a new purpose, something that would go beyond its immediate use. With the help of Margaret and the volunteers, Tom found an abandoned building not far from the distribution point that would serve as the ideal location for the drop-in center. The space was dilapidated, but it offered the shelter and privacy needed for their activities. Using some of the funds, Tom rented the space for a short period of time, long enough to start putting the idea into practice. In its first week of operation, the center was still modest. With the few materials they could gather and limited resources, they offered simple maintenance workshops and small gardening activities. Tom and Margaret were surprised to see how many people showed up, many driven by the hope of learning something that could get them off the streets. With each class, each session of conversation and encouragement, he felt the distance between him and those bitter days shrink, as if he were paving the way for a new version of himself. But even with all the excitement of the support center, Tom could not completely shake the memories of William and the way he watched from afar, like a silent and mysterious guardian. Some days, he could almost feel the weight of William's gaze as he instructed others or guided those who sought advice. It was as if William were there, witnessing his every effort and evaluating every choice. And little by little, Tom began to wonder if there wasn't an even deeper reason behind his help. As the days went by, Tom began to realize that the support center was not only transforming the lives of the people around him, but also his own. He was slowly regaining a confidence that he thought had been lost forever. Others saw in him a strength and an inspiration, something that motivated him to keep going. And deep down, he knew that, in some way, he was giving back to life what it had given him in the most difficult moments. Yet, the question persisted. What did William really expect from him? The support center grew at a rapid pace, and each day Tom was surprised by the number of people who sought their not only skills and shelter, but a new beginning. Those who had previously come for a hot meal or a place to sleep now found something much greater: opportunities for learning, and even a glimmer of hope. With the help of Margaret and the young people he had recruited, Tom organized regular workshops on practical skills. The topics were diverse, ranging from small repairs and cooking skills to gardening and basic carpentry techniques. All of this was done with limited resources, and yet the impact was clear. It was common to see participants' eyes light up as they discovered that, despite the adversities, they had the ability to learn and feel useful again. But the rapid growth of the center brought unexpected challenges. William's money was dwindling, and Tom knew he would need to find new ways to sustain the project if it was to last longer than the allotted 30 days. He knew his time was running out, and the urgency to find a solution became a shadow that followed him day and night. One day, while he was talking to Margaret about the difficulties they were facing, a group of local businessmen who had heard about the center showed up to see the project. Tom felt a mix of anxiety and hope, because for him, these businessmen represented the chance to find the support needed to keep the center going. He knew he would have to convince them that their work was valuable and deserved support. One of the businessmen, a stern-looking man with calculating eyes, watched everything in silence as Tom led the group through the center, explaining every detail, from the importance of the workshops to the impacts he and his team had already witnessed. The businessman seemed skeptical, and Tom tried hard to show the value of each activity.
Do you really believe that this type of project can have a lasting impact?
Asked the businessman, in a tone that mixed doubt and condescension. Tom stared at him, firmly, feeling the weight of the question. He thought about everything he had built there, about the people who had found a little dignity and purpose in that space, and he knew that that was worth more than any speech he could give.
I believe that, with the right support, we can change lives, yes. Not just temporarily. The people here need more than just shelter and food. They need a new chance. And that is what we are trying to offer.
The businessman watched him for a moment, as if assessing the sincerity of his words, and nodded, but without giving a definitive answer. After the visit, Tom realized that he would need to convince more than just words to gain the support of those who could contribute. He would need to show concrete results and something that proved the value of the initiative. After the businessmen visited, Tom dedicated himself even more. He began to record the progress of each person who participated in the workshops, putting together a kind of portfolio for the center. Every achievement, no matter how small, was celebrated. And as he did so, he realized how much the support center also helped him cope with his own struggles. He was no longer just a survivor of the streets. Now he was someone who helped others start over. One evening, after a long day of work, he met with Margaret and the volunteers to discuss the next step. They knew the situation was critical, and that without new resources, the project would come to an end when the money ran out. It was a difficult thought to accept, but Tom knew it was reality. But as he saw the impact of his work and the hope being reborn in so many lives, he felt that even if the deadline passed, he would leave a legacy that would last far longer than the initial money. That night, after the event that had shown the impact of the Community Support Center, Tom finally had a chance to rest. But despite his tired body and the exhaustion he felt, his mind remained restless. Sitting alone in the small room he now called home, he stared at the ceiling and thought about the extraordinary path he had taken in the last few days. The image of William still loomed in his mind, that enigmatic figure who had silently changed everything for him. There was something in William's words, in his constant visits and observations, that intrigued Tom more and more. He didn't know if William was testing him or if he simply wanted to see how far he could go, but the question remained, why him? Of all the people in need in the city, why had William chosen to help him and given him such an unusual opportunity? The next day, he arrived at the support center early, determined not to let time pass without fighting until the last moment. He knew he had a decision to make, one that would determine the fate of the project and all those who counted on it. With that decision in mind, he called Margaret and the other volunteers into a meeting.
I need to be honest with you. We are close to the deadline I had for using the funds. I don't know what comes next, but I want everyone to know how much I appreciate each and every one of you putting in the effort. We've done something extraordinary together.
The eyes around the room showed the surprise and nervousness that his words generated. Margaret, who had always been his confidant and his closest partner in the creation of the center, looked at him with concern.
What does this mean, Tom?
She asked hesitantly. Tom sighed, feeling the weight of the answer.
It means that perhaps I need to take a step back. The money we received is almost gone, and I still don't know what will become of me and the project.
Margaret didn't hesitate to take Tom's hand, a gesture of solidarity that filled him with gratitude.
You've done so much more than anyone could have imagined, Tom. This place exists because you believed in it. We will continue, even if conditions change. We will find a way.
He nodded, but he couldn't shake the feeling that the end was near. Tom continued his routine at the center with the same vigor, trying not to let his concerns show. Tom prepared himself for the reunion with William, ready to share everything he had done, and aware that this meeting would define the destination of his journey. And now he was about to discover the real reason behind it all. When he arrived at the park, Tom saw William waiting for him.
Tom, I see you kept your promise. So, how was your experience?
It was much more than I expected. Every day, I found a new purpose, something beyond my immediate needs. At first, I thought about using the money for myself, to improve my circumstances, but I realized that by doing so, I wouldn't be taking advantage of the chance you gave me. I invested the money in the support center. I helped others find hope, to start over, and today I see that I wasn't the only one who changed. We were all touched in some way by what we had begun.
I knew you would do this. From the beginning, I knew you were the right person for this.
Tom stared at him, confused.
Why were you so sure? I'm no one special, and until recently, I didn't even know how to survive from one day to the next.
William smiled, a smile full of understanding and affection, before finally revealing the secret he had kept for so long.
Tom, you may not remember me, but years ago you were someone special in my life. I was just a lost boy with no prospects. I had no resources and no one who believed in me. But then you appeared. You were my teacher, my mentor. You were the one who told me that with determination and faith, I could be and do anything I wanted. Your words, your encouragement, all of that gave me the strength to keep going even when it seemed impossible. When I needed someone to see me, to believe in me, you were there.
I remember you now. You were the quiet boy, the one who said he wanted to change his life. I always knew you had a great future.
And I did, Tom. Thanks to you. When I heard about what happened in your life, the fire, the losses, how everything fell apart for you, I was devastated. I wanted to help you, I wanted to repay you for what you did for me. But I knew that, more than money, you needed something to help you find yourself again.
You didn't have to do this. But you offered me this chance anyway.
William pulled him into a hug, a gesture full of sincerity and affection.
No, Tom, you're the one who gave me my first chance when no one else believed in me. All I did was give back a little of what you taught me. The support center is more than I could have imagined. I want it to continue. What you've built deserves to last. And I want to help permanently to make that happen.
By the end of that meeting, Tom felt that his destiny had been irreversibly transformed. William kept his promise and began funding the project consistently, giving Tom and the team the financial support. And so, from teacher and student, they became allies. Together, Tom and William continued to transform the world around them, carrying the value of empathy, giving back, and true human connection. Now tell me, if you had the chance to transform someone's life, like Tom and William did, what would you do? If you like this story and want to continue embarking on journeys full of emotion and overcoming, don't forget to subscribe.